Welcome back to Tabletop Titans for another event recap. We are just back from the SoCal Open Teams Tournament for 40k. My name is Adrian, and I'm joined today by Lil B. Brian and, of course, Bridger Han.
What's up?
How you guys doing?
Very, very well. How are you?
Doing great. A little tired, but also energized by the weekend.
Yeah, there's 3 scratchy voices on this couch for sure. We're all recovering a little bit.
So true. A little bit of Concord going on there.
Yeah.
What we're going to be talking about today is, of course, our experiences at the SoCal Open 40k Teams Tournament. We're going to talk about what happened there, how the teams format works in general, and maybe think about whether or not you should be attending yourself. Let's dive on in. All right, so first of all, let's discuss teams events in general. So 40k, of course, is a 2-player game, 1v1, and these types of teams events are not doubles events. They maintain that 1 player per table, but you show up as a team, kind of like gymnastics, for example. In this case, it was teams of 8, and in each round you would be paired up against another team. There would be a pairing process, which we'll talk about, and then you play individual games. At the end of the round, you would basically combine all the game scores to determine the team that wins for the round at large, and then you kind of progress through. So you're still playing completely normal, ordinary 40k, but there's a little bit of like a meta level going on at the same time. Yeah. This event was 8 people instead of 5, which also had some, I think, interesting consequences to it.
Yeah, I think 8-man teams is really interesting just because it allows more armies to be played. So normally when you are playing like a 5-man teams event, you just take the 5 best armies in the game. And then you kind of just throw them at each other and see what happens. But in 8-man teams, you have a lot more variation. You have a lot more room to kind of, well, this army has these 5 really bad matchups.
Yeah.
But I just won't play those 5 bad matchups because there's 8 people on the team. So in theory, I can kind of pick and choose a lot better what those particular lists that I go into are. So it makes it, for me at least, much more interesting and much more appealing to want to play some of the weaker armies.
Yeah. It encourages and almost enforces a little bit of inefficiency, right? Which is great. And that diversity in not only the armies that you're taking, but the armies that you play against too, right? We'll talk again about how the matches get paired, but you're looking for a favorable matchup for you. And if you only have 5 armies on each side, again, usually the 5 best armies, you're going to end up playing those same matchups time and time again. So that's a big, big plus of the 8-person teams. I think the main disadvantage is, of course, it's harder to get a team together, honestly. You know, you, of course, are part of Team Zero Comp, so you guys are big enough. You had a couple teams going. Bridger and I, we ended up partnering up with the Hammer Industry folks and made our own team, but that kind of like is part of the difficulty. Is like, how do you get 8 people together at the same place in the same weekend? And we even still had to sub someone out the last second.
It's true.
So
I think it's also worth mentioning 5 is an odd number, 8 is an even number. And I know this is obvious. This is basic math here.
Good insight.
But 8 people, or 8 tables, means that it's pretty likely that each team is going to get 4 matchups that they like, or 4 tables that they like, which led to a lot of draws. So that's something we're going to circle back on. But at 5 people, somebody won the initial like pairing process, or won the pairing process, and got some advantage, which then hopefully snowballs into an actual victory. In this 8-person format, we saw a lot of draws, and I believe that a large contributing factor is 8-person teams. I think if it was 9-person teams, I know, crazy.
Wild.
Or 7.
7.
Then I think we would see fewer draws, but there are also other ways that we could improve that.
Yeah. If we did 7, we could just drop Shane from our team, and then we'd be good to go for next year.
That's true.
Yeah, I think I might be off my team also.
Oh, no! Brutal. So that's the premise at a high level. Let's talk a bit about like what that pairing process is, because I think it's very, very interesting. So a couple of restrictions. Well, one really. You cannot use the same codex more than once in your entire team. This means if someone's playing Space Marines, if I'm playing Dark Angels, nobody else can play any kind of Space Marine, even if whether they're using supplements or not. Similarly, if you have a Death Guard player who wants to run some Nurglings allied in, that is your Chaos Demons book use. So I think it's good. It's obviously slightly punishing for some of the broader factions, but overall it does kind of force you to come up with interesting and weird and different builds, which is great.
Yeah, because otherwise all the Imperialists would just take a Calidus Assassin or whatever, right? So as soon as you take the Calidus, it turns off the Inquisitor or Agents book.
I actually really like this specifically in the meta that we exist in now, where Imperium just is very strong. A lot of the top armies are Imperium, and this gave Xenos armies a lot more of a chance to show up and actually shine. And I think we actually saw that. There were some representative great Xenos factions.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, you know, you also, because you're not having to fight against every army, you're able to take lists and armies that normally wouldn't be able to necessarily compete for the top tables. So that's the thing. So pairing-wise, you go up against another team, you kind of know all their armies, you can look at their lists, which you either do in advance if you're a good team, or if you're like us, you read them right when you got there. Last second. Yep. And you basically, the captains meet and you propose basically who you're going to put up first. So at a high level, you each put up a single army each, that's going to be your defender. Then the other team picks 2 armies to propose for their defender to fight. And that defending player then gets to pick between those 2 armies. They pick, it comes back, and then of course the defender also, importantly, gets to pick the table of terrain that they're playing on. Which, I don't know how you guys felt, but I mean, I think it benefited, but I really liked the diversity of terrain because I felt like there were dense boards, there were light boards and medium boards, but there was no planet bowling ball, and there was no like trench warfare. None of them were so extreme that it was unplayable.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I feel the same way.
Yeah, it's historically within teams, there is a light to heavy spectrum, and the tables are numbered like light to heavy.
Right.
But in some of the team tournaments we played in, there truly was planet bowling ball, where it's like, it's player plays terrain, and each of you has 2 buildings.
Right, yeah.
Good luck.
Good luck.
But here it was GW to ETC as the WTC as the spectrum, which essentially meant light to heavy, but it was a much more nuanced minor. It's like, well, rather than all the buildings being on an angle, so there's an alley across the diagonal of the table, they were all aligned with the table, so it's just like lines of terrain.
Exactly.
I liked it. It was highly impactful, but it was still fair.
Exactly.
And it made it feel like melee armies oftentimes on WTC, because the way that the terrain is laid out on a lot of the tables, they're very, very dense. There's one, they call it L City, where it's, if you look at the packet, you can see there's just buildings everywhere. Like, you literally cannot move vehicles anywhere, so it super favors melee armies as opposed to like some of the GW stuff, where if you want to stand inside this building to stage, there's half of the wall cut out. So that way I can see into it, you know? So it makes it much more fair to be able to bring both types of armies and have play into both of them, especially if you're the one that gets to pick the table. You know, my army is really good at this one thing, I'll pick this type of terrain every time.
Exactly.
And I think it is an important advantage for the defender, because let's say your first defender, you're putting them out. If they have 2 bad matchups out of the 8 armies, they're probably being presented with those 2 bad matchups. If you and your opponent are on the same page of what your good and bad matchups are, they're going to give you your 2 bad matchups. So then you need some way to survive that. You need to be able to pick your table and say, okay, well, gunline's really bad for me. I'll just be in this L City, and you just can't shoot me.
Exactly. And I love that, because I actually was very nervous and kind of opposed to the different layouts, the different densities before playing it. After playing it, realizing that dynamic, I was like, this is actually very interesting and actually creates better games of Warhammer. Which is, I think, a theme that we kind of see throughout. So you do that, you basically go through that process a couple times, and then the remaining teams fight each other. This does mean that the armies that get rejected, basically, that then get put back into the pool. So there's this interesting dynamic of, you know, who are we putting forwards now, who do we get back, and are we worried about certain matchups later on? So we could do a whole video just about that.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, let us know if you'd like to see that. We are going to be doing a deeper dive of my personal experience on my games for the members, so check out that member-exclusive content. But again, just broadly, let us know if you want more about the Teams format. So yeah, that was pairings. The last thing I want to talk about Teams in general for the format is the differential scoring and how games are actually scored at the end. You guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, so every game obviously scored 0 to 100 points, just like a normal game of Warhammer.
For each player.
For each player, yeah. But then when you go to score it for your teams, everything is compressed down to make it so that way you're not scoring out of 800 points, because that would be a little ridiculous. So basically you can contribute up to 20 points for your particular game to your team, and then you add all the points together for all of the games that you guys played across your team, and then whatever your score is will determine how you do. So in order to win the round, you need to score score a total of 86 points for your team. And if you want to tie the round, or if you don't win but you don't want to lose, you need to score 75 points in order to draw. So that margin of 75 to 85 is your draw range. 74 and below is a loss, and then 86 and above is a win. Right. And everything, so the way you get from your 0 to 100 to the 20 points for your game is it's based off a differential. So the higher you score in your particular game, and the less that your opponent scores, the more points you add to your team. So every 5 points after the first 6 gives you a point, essentially. So it's 6 points to get 1. So if me and Bridger are playing and he has 80 points and I have 86, that's 6 points for a differential. So I would get 1 additional point. Bridger would lose 1 point. So the game starts at a draw, 10-10. Basically every 10 points for the differential will give you 2 points.
And they would lose 2 points.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's zero sum, right? There's 20 points on every table, and you're splitting them between the players. The bigger the difference between the players in their Warhammer score, the bigger the difference in your 20-point split.
Right, exactly. And that does some interesting things. One of the negatives for me personally is it really encourages you to suppress your opponent's score as much as possible. It means you have to just kind of crush for every point possible. The positive side of that is if you are losing a game, you are still fighting for every little bit you can get. And just because you know you've lost doesn't mean that you're out. You know, we in fact sometimes put people into almost unwinnable matchups, knowing that they would try to hang on and try to close that gap as much as possible. And that is kind of like more compelling as a game and also as a story of like that last final stand. So pros and cons, I think.
I've played in events where it's just win-loss. Or I played in team events where it's just win-loss, and that feels really bad as a team's format, because the only thing you can ever contribute is a win.
Right.
And if you're losing, you're not contributing anything, and then now you're really letting the team down every time you lose.
They know,
because even if you lose by a single point, it doesn't matter. Whereas if you lose in a team's format where you're doing differential, if you lose by a single point, it's still a draw for your particular game, because you'll get 10 points, your opponent will get 10 points, it washes out, right? So I prefer the differential. I think we spoke about this at the event, where it could be improved a little bit, because there again are a lot of draws, which make it very difficult for the pairings process later in the rounds. When like if we go and look at round 4 going into round 5, everybody was on like 2 wins and 2 draws, or 3 wins and a draw, or whatever.
There were like 6 or 8 teams tied for first place.
It was like the last 2 or 3 rounds. It was madness.
So like, to put it in perspective, my team was 3 wins and 1 loss going into the final round. So if we win our game, it's possible that we get first place. Adrian's team and Bridger's team, 2 wins, 2 draws. If they win their last game, it's possible they get first place. And they carried that across 6 more teams, and that was kind of the case for everybody, right? So again, there's a much that could be improved on, I think. But at the same time, how do you approach it? I don't know.
I think I do have some thoughts, and keep in mind this is my first event of this particular format and scoring. We did a teams event a long time ago in Sigmar, and you've done some more 40k. But the tying was so weird. I think some tying is good. It creates potential comebacks and interesting dynamics. So that's an interesting thing. Round 2, for example, one of the team, Ben Jerk's team, actually tied. And obviously, while they were hoping to win, a tie meant that they didn't have a loss on their record, right? Because also win path matters. And that meant that they could potentially still be in the running. And we were like, that's going to come back to bite us later on. But then next round, all of the top teams tied, which then sort of evened all the scores back in. And then it's like, okay, so that's interesting. That creates drama. We're looking in, going into day 2, literally 6 teams all tied for first place. But then, spoiler alert, we continue to tie. We tied that round, we tied the round afterwards, and it just felt like so difficult to push out of this big margin of tying, which became frustrating. And I think part of it comes from the fact that we're basically double compressing all the scores, right? You're taking your scores in your games and you're saying, okay, every 5 points is 1 point, and then we're taking those and we're putting into this other scale that also determines, okay, these are like these other margins that you need, and it's a lot of points actually that you need to get out of that tie margin. So I would personally maybe consider shrinking that. Again, not the biggest expert, but that was just as an observation as a first-time tournament goer, something that was happening there.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of discussion at this particular event about this because of how many ties there were.
So many.
A 10-point team differential needed to win, or more than 10. You need more than 10 points ahead of your opponent's team, team-wide, is what, 50 in-game point differential, which is a lot.
That's a lot.
Even across 8 games, it's just too much. Especially given the fact that, because there's an even number of players on each team, if you're both pairing well, you should get 4 good matchups and 4 bad matchups on each side. And they kind of canceled out. Most of our matches, we were like, okay, well, you know, my game and your game cancel out. Shane's game and Rick's game cancel out. Oh, okay, so at the end of this, like, we're all waiting for the final games to finish, and we're doing the calculations. It's like, oh, we need to, like, 18-2 that table for this to not be a draw.
Right.
Okay, well, that seems unlikely. So I think tightening that tie margin on the team level, I wouldn't even be opposed to getting rid of it entirely. I think if you score the same number of team points you tied, but I don't know why we are looking for ties at a team level. I think it's very compelling to say, oh, man, I eked out a tie in my game. Like, I held down the fort. And we had a couple players, I like this for the format, we had a couple players where we said, okay, our team has no good matchups with this army. We can't handle, let's say, Sisters. We have no good matchup into Sisters. Well, we have this Demon list. It's really good at just scoring and holding off the opponent and not giving up a lot of points. He's not going to win, but he's looking for a tie every time, right? And I thought that was a really cool concept for the format. At a team level, there's no strategy that's like, oh, well, we're just looking to tie at a team level. That doesn't make any sense. Why are we looking for ties? If you won, you won. If you lost, you lost. Let's move on to the next round and keep playing.
That's fair,
so I think we need to narrow that margin or even get rid of it.
Because it also messes up the pairings process, like going down the line, because somebody's playing up, somebody's playing down, and sometimes it's a very large difference between the teams that you're playing. So, for example, our other team, like Teams Our Company had 2 teams, our second team played so far down on their last round just because of the amount of ties and the amount of...
And because you can't play people you already played.
Exactly. And so all the teams that they had played were placing well.
Played each other.
They had already played, and all of them have ties, so their records are slightly too similar, but they've already played, so now they have to play down. But now, because there's so many ties, and then you have the teams, there's like a steep drop-off of the losses now.
So you end up with a finals that makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the 2 top scoring teams can't play. They already played. And the teams below them, they already played. So you have this cabal of teams that already played. And it's just like who can dunk on a lower team the most to win the tournament. I don't think anybody wants to see that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Very, very weird, very interesting. But it made for a very talkative, very contemplative weekend, which was ultimately a lot of fun. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the format specifically. We've kind of suggested what happened for us, but I mean, what did you guys think? How was your weekend?
I had a great weekend. Most of my team is based in Vegas. There's like the collective of Bay Area guys that I play with normally, or whenever we play. But it's really nice to always be able to hang out with them and to spend time with them and play and talk about matchups and armies and whatever. And like the whole build up to the event is also very fun too, because everybody's trying to coordinate armies and like, well, our team has this, and then do we just like duplicate the lists and have it on this team also? Like, how do we want to, you know, that whole type of thing, right? So it's a lot of fun. I had a great time being able to hang out and talk to everybody and see all the people that I don't often get to see anyways, right?
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, I had a great weekend. Lovely event. I think a great part of teams is you can come into the event with whatever goal you have, and you actually end up having a much better experience than if you were to try that solo. Like if you're going in solo and you say, I just want to win a game, like great, and you might accomplish your goal and feel good, but when you go in with that same goal and you're on a team, and now your personal goal and the team goals can kind of align, and you say, okay, I want to get my 1 win, but also like, oh, my team's doing great, like that's fun, or you know, I just want to draw most of my matches, like I don't want to go negative on my total points. I think people can come to a team's event with different expectations, and it's a much more chill environment, and I really appreciated that. And I was actually pretty proud of just how I did in general.
You did great.
I've like cultivated a personality as like a Warhammer WWE wrestler where like everybody thinks like, oh, that guy can't actually play Warhammer. And I think I took a few people off guard. Like I did reasonably well. I'm happy with how it went.
Like, well, you actually know like what you're talking about here. That's amazing. That's awesome. I love that. I had a great weekend. It was just a great time of like fun and camaraderie. You know, we studied at an Airbnb. And you know, we played some Magic, even though we hate that game. It was fantastic, and you know, we had some great dinners and great chats. And it's, as always with these events, it's also a great time to just see all your friends that travel in. You know, wherever it might be from the world. Vegas, we got to see Tyler, which is always nice, and it's really fun. And again, because of the nature of the scoring, everyone's constantly talking,
Yep.
and everyone's speculating,
Yep.
and everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing, which is not normally the case with a normal Warhammer game.
No, yeah, you just wait till the games are over and you talk about it afterwards.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So it was an absolute blast. I had a great time. I even enjoyed the WTC terrain.
Yeah?
I think I want to get a set.
Yeah,
for the
WTC
studio.
terrain I like a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I'm super into it.
It was very cool.
As a Melee player, I'm in.
Yeah, exactly.
I approve.
Yeah, right?
I think more of this.
That was something I wanted to mention, yeah, because you had mentioned, wanting to tire games or whatever. And I think I generally got pretty good matchups this weekend. I think day 2, I was tossing on, I've fought Necron twice with DDAs and nobody wanted to fight. But like generally speaking, I had pretty good matchups. And that became somewhat of a strategy with our team.
Sure.
And the opposite happens, like vice versa, right? You can go into a matchup knowing it's bad, and then the expectation is not that you win, which is different than in a singles where you're like, I need to win. Now it's like, no. We all have acknowledged this is going to be a tough game.
Yep.
And so like you get points for trying, and that's awesome. And I think that's really, really cool. So you get a little asterisk next to your losses.
Yeah.
Right.
You do get one next to your wins too, but that is just as satisfying, knowing like, okay, we're going to go in and get those points.
Yeah.
Somebody has to dive on the grenade, because oftentimes there's that one problem army in the meta, like Sisters, because they haven't, as of this event, they were not updated with the points, or like even they're still using old Blood Angels. Not that that's like a problem army in the meta.
This was hopefully truly the final flight,
Yeah.
which I know Melody had said like 3 months ago at Nova was her final Blood Angels, but I think they're finally gone now.
Yeah, but oftentimes you'll have somebody that needs to jump on the grenade, and your whole team is aware. It's like,
Yeah.
you just take one for the team, and then you'll get 5 points, maybe 4 points, which is not I don't want to say it's a bad score, but like if you're expected to score 4 points, then that's okay. And now your team plans around it, because now they're like, all right, you're going to get 4, so we need to make up those points elsewhere. And it's one of the things that you kind of play around.
Well, I'll tell you what, even if you get 0-20'd, someone else didn't have to face that.
Right.
Right. It means you enabled someone else to get a good matchup to potentially get their own 20-0 or something.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that happens that you don't always see, but like you're like, oh, thank you for facing
thank you for your service.
this person, so I didn't have to face that army, and that enables me to score higher points. That's a thing that happens too.
Another cool aspect of teams, I don't know how much longer we want to go, but this is a new topic, is Warhammer is mostly like a all-star sport, where there's like one person in a group that is just way better than everybody else in their group, and this is very common amongst many groups. So when that person goes to form a team, it's a very mixed skill level team, and this means that there's a lot of interesting mingling and playing of matches at these events. So you have, like, maybe the best player in the world is playing your local friend, right? And they get to have a game against that best player in the world.
Totally.
And they get to actually have that conversation with them. And it's a very rare experience, right? Like, when I played John Lennon at Charity Hammer, that was like a big deal for me. I learned a lot in that game from him, and I thought that was really cool. But that was coming from a place of privilege. That wasn't just like I got to go to an event as a special thing and play John Lennon. This is just, you and your team are doing well, him and their team are doing well.
Right.
You get to play Ben Jerk, right? Like, you get to talk to him after the game, like, what should I have done differently? How can I play better? What do you have any advice? List building, right? You get to actually pick their brains, and that's super cool. In addition, when you talk about jumping on a grenade, you can jump on a grenade not just of an army, but a player, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you can take someone who says, okay, I'm not going to win, but I'm going to 8-12. I'm going to get 8 points against their best player, and hopefully that enables our best player to score more, and we'll win. I think it's a really cool dynamic, and it again lets people come in with different expectations and perspectives and still have a great time, and even perform well.
Yeah.
And more to that point too, like you were saying, like John Lennon being, one of the top players, right? You could have that person on your team and then have somebody who's not actually as nearly as good, right? And then they kind of like self-balance. Right. Because you could be trying to set up that one person to get the 20 O's, but then you also know that you have a person that, maybe they're newer to the game, whatever, they're just your friend, they want to play on your team, like whatever, 8-man teams, we mentioned already, it's very difficult to get 8 people together to play at an event. So oftentimes you will have that that separation in the skill level. So when you have somebody that's always going for a 20-0 that you're trying to set up to get those 20 points for your team, you also have to keep in mind that it kind of gets offset by the person that's going to be scoring the 6 or 7 points or 5 points in every other game. So while you have like the super mean player, not mean, but like the super good player, you also have to keep in mind like the scores do kind of self-balance.
Players and armies and things in a way that you wouldn't normally. And it's also not as fixed as people lead you to think, especially with teams. It's like, oh, it's all skew, it's all this, it's all that. That was not my experience with the weekend. I thought there was quite a healthy diversity of things, and like there was always a chance, and we were really looking at the player and the list to determine what table we wanted, who we were putting into what. It wasn't like this army beats this army. We could not do it like that, which, you know, I think a lot of people think that's how it works.
Right. We saw a lot of, there was a common theme of when we're doing pairings, people would have laptops and they would have a matrix of like, you know, this army is going to crush that army every time. Yeah. And we did some of that. We did some of like, okay, I think this is a good matchup. I think this is a bad matchup. But the fact that we talked more in the moment about what the list was and made those decisions live, I think enabled us to go undefeated in that we actually thought about it. We weren't just brainlessly like, okay, these are our two good, great, go, find your table.
Yeah, exactly.
And we fought for all of our points knowing that maybe it's a bad matchup, but you can still come out with an 8-12 rather than a 6-14 or something.
And it's cool. And you can be like, okay, the Custodians, Bridger, what do you think? And you'll be like, do they have X, Y, and Z? No, they have B and C. Be like, okay, so that means you do this and you do that. Yeah, which is so cool and so fun.
Yeah, and I think we actually saw that play out. We had a couple of what I would describe as missed pairings from our opponents. Where I was like, oh, they gave me this. Like, do they know what my list does? Like, okay, cool, let's... Like, I'll take that, and then I'll score a bunch of points. And then we do, and it's great.
Exactly.
Like, it's a cool experience.
Yeah, and I had one of those also. I feel like you can win or lose the round just off, like obviously you can win or lose the round just based off the pairings, right? So if you have somebody who's very new to it and doesn't really know what they're doing, and you have somebody that's very experienced and does know what they're doing, oftentimes they can kind of take advantage of that fact and just out-pair you. So like, they get the pairings that they want, you don't, like maybe you get one that you want or two or something, but as Bridger said, you really, 4 and 4 is kind of like theoretically what you're looking for, but if you only get 3, that's a big difference. It's a big deal.
It's so important. So, you know, big shout out to the captains because that's a huge responsibility and a huge task, and it's stressful. So shout out to them. Shout out to JP. Shout out to Jake.
To Jake, I didn't have to play Templars this event.
I played Templars.
I would have cried.
No.
I would have cried.
So, you know, we haven't said it explicitly, but I think teams, you should do it.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Highly recommend checking it out. Just getting your group of friends together. I know 8's a lot, but definitely check it out and get out there, play Warhammer. It's a great time. Look, I think that's going to do it for us. Again, we're going to have a members-only video where I dive a little bit deeper into my games. I want to talk more about that and Dark Angels moving forwards. So join us for that. And if you're not a member, consider becoming one. Otherwise, let us know in the comments below if you have questions about teams. Tell us about your own experiences. We're just very, very interested. With that, folks, we'll catch y'all next time on the Tabletop. Bye!